Capital Queers, Alex Reynolds Mystery. Book 3. Author, Fred Hunter. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1999. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 12. The rest of the day was pretty much a mad dash to get all the arrangements made for an unexpected trip. But first we took Peter to the doctor to have his head checked. When the doctor asked how Peter had received his injury, we couldn't exactly explain to him that Peter had been conked on the head by a raging Montanean. Mother used her disquieting talent for extemporation and came up with a story about how Peter had slipped on an egg that she just dropped on the floor and hit his head on the corner of the stove on his way down. Dr. Jameson, a wizened young man of about 40, who'd been our family doctor for about 5 years, blinked at her through his heavy glasses. I got the impression that he didn't believe her. After all, he had to know the dent in Peter's head didn't fit the story. But he didn't bother pursuing the matter. He merely told us what the signs of concussion were, and that if Peter showed any of them, we were to call him right away. After the visit with the doctor, we made a quick swing by the Park View pet shop for a carrier for the dog. All through these little errands, we were followed at an indiscreet distance by one of Frank's men in an unmarked car. He didn't bother trying to stay out of sight because there was no reason to disguise his presence from us, and his high visibility was probably an asset to us at that point. Later that evening, I found I was having a delayed reaction to the attack. I'd gotten beyond fear for myself and moved on to being so worried about Peter that I became over-solicitous enough to get him annoyed. When we got home and I offered to get him some tea, he waved me away in an offhand manner that would have made me crack him on the head if someone hadn't already done it for me, and said he would get it himself. Mother waved us back off and said she'd make it, because after all, she was British, and what the hell did we know about making tea? Peter laughed and held his head. Sometimes I wonder if she's aware that she's the one from another country, he said. After tea, I made reservations for the earliest flight I could get us on and still have time to go with Frank to the import company. I don't think any of us slept that night, despite the honor guard that sat outside our house. Just for the record, when one is being pursued by foreign assassins, it really does make you feel more secure to know that the police are watching your house, no matter how you might feel about a police state. The next morning, I went with Frank to the Thai Import-Export Company of Chicago. It was a wasted trip, as I knew it would be. The man who'd cornered me behind the garage wasn't there, and neither were the two assailants. And I swear to God, the rest of them were trying to look alike just to make me look like a fool. Along with Mr. Sulkin, all of the employees seemed to be conspiring to pull one of those routines out of the Lady Vanishes, either denying any knowledge of the men who were looking for us, pretending they didn't speak English or couldn't understand us. If this sounds at all prejudicial, you have to remember that I was under a lot of stress by that point, and what with 2 friends dead and having been threatened with seeing the insides of my own stomach, I'm sure the ones who said they couldn't understand us probably really couldn't. Less than 2 hours later, Mother, Peter, and I, along with the dog, were on a plane to Washington, D.C., all the way to the airport. I kept a sharp eye out the back window, trying to tell whether or not we were being followed. The police guard kept close on our tail, but I couldn't tell if there was anybody behind them because the traffic was so heavy and so slow that it looked like we were being shadowed by everyone. On the plane, Peter and I sat on one side of the aisle, and Mother sat in the window seat on the other, with the dog belted into the seat on the aisle. "How's your head?" I said to Peter. "Are you going to ask me that every half hour?" I nodded. "Until the welt goes away?" "Yes." He leaned over and whispered lovingly into my ear. "No dizziness, no nausea. The only fluttering in my stomach is when I look at you and those beautiful blue eyes of yours, and I still get butterflies." I drew back slightly from him, smiled, and said, "If you think that's going to get me off your case, you're out of your mind." He laughed, leaned over, and kissed me lightly on my earlobe. I happened to look up at that moment, and the flight attendant, a young guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a cult video and into his uniform, noticed us smiling and gave us a wink. I found myself humming, "We are family." When we were coming into Washington, I saw at once that Mason had been right. There is something stirring and majestic about all the memorials, monuments, and huge ornate government buildings that make even a little faggot's heart swell with pride. Just coming in for a landing in Washington gave me the feeling that I was entering the seat of the civilized world. Then again, I feel that way every time Peter and I make love. Once we'd landed, we had to find some way to get to the hotel. "We'll get a taxi," said Mother. "Why don't we just rent a car?" I said. Mother turned to me, her expression absolutely dumbfounded. "Honestly, Alex, sometimes I wonder who raised you." "What?" "You act like you've never been followed by killers before. Where is your head in this case?" "I haven't seen hide nor hair of those Montanans since we left home this morning." "They didn't have to follow us here," Mother explained patiently. "They only had to find out where we were going. Then all they had to do was call their people here and have them pick up on us." "But we want to talk to them," I said. "Huh? We bloody well better talk to them on our terms, and that means finding them before they find us." Mother had, in fact, decided we should take a cab because it would be much harder to follow. And that, she proved correct. We have a hell of a lot of cabs in Chicago, but we pale in comparison to the veritable sea of taxis and limos that were on the streets of our nation's capital. They were all performing some sort of demonic bumper car race, weaving in and out and around us. It was as if all of their occupants had screamed, "I'm being followed! Lose him!" as they leaped into the various vehicles, and the sheer number of cabs was mind-boggling. I really believe we'd gone over a mile before I saw an actual car. Our destination was the Georgetown Suites on 31st, just off M Street. The minute I saw the sign for M Street, I pointed it out to Peter and Mother. "Just like the Peter Lorre movie," I said. "And pretty apt. M for murder?" Peter said, nodding. "Don't be so pretentious, darling," said Mother as she rubbed the dog's snout with her index finger through the wire gate of its carrier. "If our luck holds out, we'll be able to take care of everything with nary a one of us being murdered." We pulled up in front of the hotel, which was huge and elegant. The only excuse for this expense was that Mother likes luxury. I do too, but I have the decency to feel a little guilty about indulging in it. I suppose that stems from the fact that in my early childhood I heard echoes of the abomination that children should clean their plates, because people were starving in Europe. Mother, however, was in Europe, or at least England, because, like any good Brit, she will never refer to England as being part of Europe. While people were supposed to be starving there, and she's always said that want and plenty should be enjoyed in equal measures. Anyway, the hotel was enormous and painted bright white with a short marble staircase leading up to massive glass doors that were opened for us by twin doormen. I mean that literally. The interior went over the edge of posh into the land of conspicuous opulence. Obvious expense was everywhere, from the filigree frames of the portraits of the presidents across one wall of the lobby to the plush red carpeted staircase that I swear was from the set of Gone with the Wind. Men in Italian suits strolled by with a self-possession that let you know they were in no hurry to get where they were going, because nothing important would be done until they got there. The women were adorned with modest diamonds proper to the time of day. I imagined they would all look like chandeliers by nightfall in business suits or dresses, depending on whether they were attending meetings or luncheons. And then there was the three of us. dressed like normal American citizens. When we went to check in, the desk clerk was so haughty toward us that I could feel frost forming on my nose. And the look she gave the dog when Mother set its carrier on the desk was enough to make me want to snatch the animal up in my arms and hug it protectively. At least that was the desk clerk's attitude. Until she asked how we would be paying, and Mother pulled a wallet from her purse, opened it, and made a point of accidentally spilling a half-dozen platinum cards on the counter. She gave an apologetic half-smile to the clerk, glanced at the cards, and with a show of absent-mindedness that could have won her an Oscar on the opposite coast, picked a card at random, handed it to the clerk, and said, "Oh, use this one, I guess." She then gathered up the rest like a bridge deck, shuffled them, and slipped them back into her wallet. We were shown to our neighboring rooms by a pair of bellmen who looked like they couldn't decide whether to pay more attention to Mother, where the money was, or to Peter, who could turn heads in a monastery. I trailed behind, rolling my eyes like Laura Petrie. The suite into which Peter and I found ourselves ushered was a study in tasteful elegance. There was a living room complete with sitting area, an entertainment center, and wet bar, and the bedroom was so posh it made me want to set aside our present troubles, dire as they were, and spend the afternoon naked in bed with Peter and a box of chocolates. The bellman opened the curtains and said to Peter, "That's the Potomac." "Very nice," I said with a slight edge in my voice as I stepped between the two of them and looked out the window. Peter smiled. "If you need anything," the bellman continued, still paying particular attention to Peter, "anything at all, please don't hesitate to call. I'll be glad to do anything." "We will," said Peter, emphasizing the "we." He then handed the kid a tip that was healthy enough to make me blink. The bellman smiled and left at a leisurely pace. I said. "What?" Peter was trying hard to look innocent. "That was the first time I've ever seen the chicken hawk routine in reverse." He smiled, put his hands on my waist, and drew me closer. "Are you calling me old?" "Of course not," I said, breaking into a smile. "Even uneducated bellmen know that you're just right." He reached up and ran his fingers through my hair, then rested his hand at the back of my head. "Did you see the bedroom?" he asked softly. "All that's missing is scantily clad slave boys stirring the air with palm fronds." "We can skip the slave boys," he said, pulling my head forward. Our lips met, and he gave me one of those long, deep kisses that make your insides melt. It had the intensity that can only be achieved through years together. My hand slid around to the small of his back and pulled him tightly against me. I could feel how excited it was. I've often said, maybe out of misplaced sense of self-effication, that I think Peter is more attractive than I am, and I really do feel that way at times. But besides being a doting husband, he apparently sees something in me that gets him going. I have to confess that the first time we made love, just thinking of the fact that I aroused him gave me a buzz, and 7 years later, it still does. When our lips parted, I said, "If you do that again, I'm going to have to change my underwear." He laughed and replied, "Let's risk it." And we would have done that, but we were interrupted by a knock at the door and Mother's voice saying, "Boys, are you in there?" I grimaced. Honest to God, she's developing the timing of a British sex farce. Peter laughed while I went and opened the door. "Of course we're in here," I said. "What do you think we did, run out for a snack?" "What on earth's the matter with you?" said Mother as she came into the room. I could feel my face going beet red. Nothing. I'm sorry. I'm just a little tired after the trip and all that running around." There was a beat before she said, "Well, you'll have time to rest later." She paused and shot Peter a knowing glance that caused him to blush as well. "We have work to do now." "Yes, Mother. I think the first thing we should do is go and see Larry Nelson." "You aren't going to call him first?" I asked, clearing my throat and trying to recover myself. I like the element of surprise ever so much better. If it's ever possible to surprise him, said Peter. Mother clucked her tongue. I wouldn't want to give him time to make excuses for not seeing us. We don't even know where he is, I said, beginning to sound like the consummate whiner. But we do, said Mother. At least I think we do. Larry is with the CIA, and the CIA is at Langley. She said this with so much authority, she sounded like she'd been there 100 times. Langley? What's that? The building that houses the CIA. How do you know that? I asked the bellman, of course, said Mother, once again looking at me as if she thought I was terribly slow. I'm sure everyone in this town knows that everyone else is doing anyway. Langley is a bit of a distance, so I think we'd better hire a car. It should be safe now, even if those Montanean fellows know we're in Washington. I don't think we were followed to the hotel, do you? I was still working on how quaint those Montanean fellows sounded. She made them sound like Shriners. No, I don't think so. I'll call and hire the car. You boys get cleaned up and meet me in the lobby. What about the dog? I asked. I wasn't worried about him, you understand, but, well, it didn't seem right to leave him in a strange hotel room. He's happy as a lark now that he's out of his cage. He's already curled up on the bed watching the television. He'll be fine while we're gone. With this, she breezed out of the room. Mother has a tendency to appear as if she's being propelled on the wind. What makes her think we need to get cleaned up? I said to Peter. A half hour later, a rental car, a rust-red Toyota Corolla, was delivered to the door of the hotel. Another one of the perks of staying somewhere classy. The car and the door-to-door delivery had been arranged by the concierge. Mother accepted the keys from the attendant and climbed behind the wheel, with me beside her and Peter in the back seat. Mother handed me the directions the bellman had written out for her on a sheet of heavy Bond hotel stationery, and armed with a map of Washington and the surrounding areas provided by the concierge. She tried to follow the directions as I read them. I'd like to say we reached Langley with no trouble, but Washington seems to be one big clover leaf, where all the streets go around in circles without going anywhere in particular. We tried to get our bearings, driving along at a somewhat leisurely pace, and finally managed to get across the Potomac and onto the George Washington Memorial Parkway, which should have been easy since, as it turned out, it wasn't that far from our hotel, but it seemed to take an hour for us to accomplish it. Once we were on the parkway, getting to our destination was more or less a breeze. The parkway is a fairly straight northwesterly shot to the CIA, with a clearly marked exit for Langley and an off-ramp that practically put us in Lawrence Nelson's lap. The building managed to be massive and nondescript at the same time, at least in comparison to historical buildings like the Capitol and the Pentagon. Mother steered the car around into the driveway to the visitor's entrance and was stopped at the gate by a uniformed guard who emerged from a booth carrying a clipboard in his left hand. He made a sideways whirling motion with his index finger, signaling Mother to roll down her windows. "State your business, please," he said promptly. I leaned across her and intoned, "We're here to see Larry." "Alex, please," Mother said, with some irritation. She turned to the guard and said politely, "We're here to see Agent Lawrence Nelson. Is he expecting you?" "I really don't know," Mother replied with a shrug. The guard raised an eyebrow and said, "Ma'am?" "Well, we don't have an appointment with him, if that's what you mean, but as to whether or not he's expecting us, with Larry, that's difficult to tell." "And you talk about me," I whispered to her. "If you tell him we're here, I'm sure he'll see us." "Names," the guard said, raising his clipboard and poising his pen. "Gene Reynolds, Alex Reynolds, and Peter Livesey." "Just a moment, ma'am." The guard gave a slight nod, then went into his booth and picked up the phone. Peter said, "Gene, you realize that you sounded like a Class A nut." "I was trying to speak their language," He waited forever while the guard spoke on the phone. There's nothing like sitting in a car at the gate of the CIA while a guard checks on you to make you feel like you've done something wrong. Although Nelson knew us, and even though we worked for these people off and on, I found myself running through all my possible sins in my head. Of course, I could only come up with one that the CIA would care about, but that was what had made Nelson decide to take us on as part-timers. Although 2 years later, I was still smarting from his reference to the possibility of someone of our ilk coming in handy from time to time. The guard finally replaced the phone and came back to the car. "Okay, ma'am," he said, touching 2 fingers to his head in a sort of salute. "Go through the gate and keep to the left. Follow the drive around to the front of the parking lot to the visitor slots. They're clearly marked. Go in through the visitor's entrance to the desk and announce yourselves. They'll take it from there." "You have your instructions?" I said to Mother as the gate was raised. "Follow them to the letter, or you and your loved ones will suffer the consequences." "Oh, do shut up," Mother said with a wave of her hand. She tried to sound lighthearted, but the expression on her face was pretty grave as she steered the car around the lot and into one of the visitors' spaces directly in front of the entrance. The guard hadn't been joking about them being clearly marked. Each space bore a sign that said "Visitors Parking," which somehow managed to look like a direct order from the president. We climbed out of the car, and I noticed that all 3 of us seemed to be walking in slow motion. As we approached the doors, there was something surreal about being at the actual CIA headquarters. "You know, if you told me 10 years ago that I'd be visiting the CIA," I said in a mock Western accent, "I'd have told you was crazy." "Hell, if you told me that 3 years ago, I would have told you were crazy," Peter replied. And he didn't sound happy. We came up to the desk behind which were 2 more guards, 1 male, 1 female. The woman had jet black hair and skin as white as a sheet. Her brows looked like they'd been carefully ruled on with a fine point black marker. The male guard was built like a brick wall and looked about as dense. He stayed in the background. "Yes," said the female guard, arching her eyebrow as if she couldn't imagine us having any right to be there. "We're here to see Agent Nelson. Is he expecting you?" "Look," said Peter, who is much quicker to lose his patience with government types than either Mother or me. "We just went through this with the guard in the parking lot. Didn't he call you?" "Look," said Peter, who is much quicker to lose his patience with government types than either Mother or me. "We just went through this with the guard in the parking lot. Didn't he call you?" "Yes," said the woman without batting an eyelash. "And?" said Peter. The woman's right brow formed a perfect carrot over her eye. "And is Agent Nelson expecting you?" Peter heaved an exasperated sigh. Mother said quickly, "As far as we know, he is not expecting us to be here. However, if you tell him we're here, I'm sure he'll see us." "Mm-hmm," said the woman, reaching for the phone on the desk. "Names." "Oh, Christ," said Peter. The woman turned her steely eyes to him and said evenly, "Is that your name, sir?" Mother repeated our names, and the guard dialed the phone. She had a brief, hushed conversation, then replaced the receiver. "Well, you have a seat over there, please," she said, pointing to a seat of ultra-modern chairs with curved steel legs and brown foam rubber seats. "Is Larry coming down?" Mother asked. "Someone will be down," the woman replied opaquely. Mother shrugged and ushered us over to the chairs as if she were arranging us for a short-handed party. We were kept waiting long enough that I had time to take in the surroundings. There was a glass wall to the right that looked into the center of the building. Just past this wall was an atrium that was either lit by a skylight or by the most realistic artificial lighting I've ever seen. In the center of the atrium was a bevy of tropical plants surrounded by marble benches on which Numerous people were seated, talking and eating. It was a pleasant enough scene until I got the idea in my head that perhaps this place was prepared for some sort of attack during which the occupants of the building could comfortably take refuge, like some sort of an exotic bunker with a park at its center. It wouldn't have surprised me. These thoughts were interrupted by an angry buzzer, which signaled the opening of a door in the glass wall. A woman who had looked young enough to have a healthy career ahead of her and old enough to be able to hold her own in this veritable men's club stepped through the doorway and came directly to us. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said to Mother. "Yes." "I am Agent Nelson's assistant. Will you follow me?" "I assume you mean all three of us," said Mother with a sidelong glance at Peter and me. "Of course." The woman started back toward the door with the air of someone who knows her request will be followed without question. When she reached the door, it buzzed once again, and I glanced at the guard's desk, and the male guard was holding down a button. We followed the woman to a bank of elevators on the right, about halfway around the atrium. She remained a few steps ahead of us and never spoke a word, which I was beginning to find unnerving. I felt like we were being led to see the school principal. When we reached the elevators, she pressed the button and turned slightly so that she was almost facing us. "Larry Nelson is here, isn't he?" said Mother in a tone that told me she was finding the silence annoying too. "Of course," said the woman, then fell back into silence. We rode up to the 4th floor with her, then stepped off the elevator and followed her down a long hallway that led away from the elevators. Both sides of the hall were lined with office doors, all identical, and none of them numbered. I wondered if this woman had some sort of homing signal to find the office we were looking for, or if she was silently counting her way down the hall. She came to an abrupt stop in front of one of the doors and knocked twice. "Come," said a familiar voice from inside. The woman opened the door and stepped aside without entering. Mother, Peter, and I filed in, and the woman shut the door, closing herself on the outside. "Well, well, well," said Agent Larry Nelson, folding his hands on a modest desk. "Look who we have here." Nelson is one of those people who never has so much as a hair out of place, and doesn't look like it takes any effort. He has dark hair and dark skin and is almost ostentatiously handsome, although he doesn't give any indication of knowing it. I sometimes wonder if that's part of his agent training. He didn't get up or offer any of us a handshake. He simply sat there in his usual expensive dark blue suit, staring at us with those x-ray eyes of his. He didn't look pleased to see us. "May we sit down?" I said. "Of course." He gave a single nod of his head in the direction of the 2 chairs in front of his desk. I pulled up a third from a table by the windows. "You don't seem surprised to see us," I said once we were seated. "I'm not surprised very often," he replied. "You knew we were in town already, didn't you?" said Peter. Nelson sat back in his high-backed chair. "I knew you were in town. I didn't know you would come here. It's fairly unusual to have someone drop by." "Next time we'll make a date," I said. "How did you know we were in Washington?" Peter asked. "Does it matter?" "I guess not," Peter replied. "No explanations would make me happy." "I know quite a few things. For example, I know that Dunn and Hamilton from the State Department are on a plane from Chicago to Washington as we speak." "So they're ones who told you," Peter said. "They seem to think that now that you're out of Chicago, there's no reason for them to stay there." "We need help," said Mother. Her tone caused me to glance over at her. The expression on her face was highly displeased. She clearly was not enjoying this reception. "That doesn't surprise me either." He was normally a blank page, but on this occasion he was being much more terse than he would ordinarily be. "When I talked to you the other day about the break-in," Mother continued, "I told you what was going on." "Not quite all." Mother contrived to look affronted, but given our record, it was a difficult task. Even I could see that we somehow managed to give the impression that we knew more than we did. "Especially after my blunder while trying to save my life. Mother straightened her back and said, I told you everything that we knew at the time. We've learned more since then. Yes, I said, taking up the thread. Like we learned what it is that everyone's looking for. A diamond. I think you mean the diamond, Nelson said wryly. So you've heard about it, said Mother. Nelson sighed. Having caught Mother's tone, he leaned forward, resting his arms on his desk. When I spoke with Agent Hamilton, at your insistence, I might add, he explained to me that somehow you have managed to get yourself mixed up in what may well become an international incident. It wasn't our fault. I was coming dangerously close to whining. I have no doubt of that. It never is. I thought it would be better to get back on track than to try to argue that point. Given our activities of the last 3 years, I would have lost. What we told you was true. We don't know what these people were looking for when we called you, and we don't have it. That's the problem. These Montanean people are out to kill us because they think we have it and won't give it back to them. Just yesterday, Alex and Peter were attacked by them. If I hadn't come home with Frank O'Neill, I don't like to think what would have happened. So we need your help, I said. And what help would that be? The Montaneans are here, somewhere in the Washington area. Can't you locate them and tell them that we don't have their damn diamond and get them off our backs? Nelson sat back in his chair. You know that I can't get involved in any case being carried out on our native soil. What? Mother explained, followed closely by Peter and me. What are you on about? Every bloody time you've seen us, you've been carrying out some shenanigans there on our near native soil. Only under very special circumstances, Nelson said with a slight tilt of his head. And that is at a very limited level. I can't get involved in this. I can't interfere in something being handled by the State Department. It would mean my job. It may mean our lives, said Peter. I would think that constitutes special circumstances. Nelson looked at him for a full minute before responding. I'm curious. Why didn't you just go to Dunn and Hamilton and ask them to deliver this message for you? Once again, he looked like he already knew the answer. Because we don't trust them, and they don't trust us, I said quickly. Nelson looked at me and raised an eyebrow, so I continued. We don't know that it was these Montaneans who broke into our house the first time. It may very well have been your people. He started to correct me, so I did it myself. Sorry, it may very well have been the State Department people trying to get the thing back. And aside from that, said Peter, we think that Dunn and Hamilton are more interested in getting the diamond back than they are in the fact that these people have killed 2 of our friends. We happen to believe that human life is more valuable than some stinking stone, no matter how valuable it is or how many people pray to it. And why don't they trust you? Nelson said without emotion. They don't think we're telling them the truth, I said. They seem to think we have the diamond. Are you sure you don't? Mother's brow furrowed so deeply, I thought she might crease her skull. Larry, exactly how daft do you think we are? I'll reserve judgment on that. She ignored him. If we had that diamond and had hoped to sell the blasted thing, we certainly wouldn't have given that up as a bad job and returned it after all that's happened. Not that that would save our lives at this point, I added. Apparently, the Montaneans are a vengeful people. What we have to do is get them to understand that we don't have it. That we never had it, said Peter. And I would think hearing it from you would carry some weight, said Mother. Nelson looked at her for a few moments with his usual impassive face. Mother was the only person I knew of who could occasionally break through the wall into the little human being that lives somewhere inside this man. Jane, you have to understand, first of all, that as a representative of the CIA, I cannot approach these people about this. Secondly, from what I understand, the Montaneans are a very important factor to the Thai government, and right at the moment, our 2 governments are in the midst of negotiating. Don't say it, Peter exclaimed hotly. You're not going to tell us that you can't hunt down these killers because of some stupid trade agreement you're all banking on. Nelson looked at him and said nothing for a few seconds. Apparently, Peter had hit the nail on the head. All I can say is that the talks are at a critical stage, and even if they weren't any indication on our side that we were somehow working against their government, would cause serious problems, both in the present negotiations and in the agreements that already exist. Money, I said with enough contempt that I sounded exactly like my husband. You're willing to do anything you can to placate them, even at the cost of the lives of two people who are worth more than the lot of you put together. Not anything, Nelson replied coolly. Nelson, these people have killed two of our friends, I said. And do you have proof of that? What? Do you have proof that they're the murderers? Yes, the one who was going to cut me open admitted to it. Was there anyone else there? I knew he was playing devil's advocate, and it was really making me angry. Did there have to be? Yes, a witness. If your police in Chicago had any evidence, then the people who killed your friends would already be in jail. On your word alone, no jury in the world will convict them. But the police can't even find them. And Alex, said Mother firmly. I stopped in the middle of my argument and looked at her. First things first, let's try to save our own little necks. Then we can see if we can put the noose around the others. She turned to Nelson and said, Are we to understand that we're to receive no help from you whatsoever? No, said Nelson as calmly as ever. I didn't mean that we were just going to leave you swinging in the wind. Oh, there's comforting news, said Mother. I can go through proper channels and see if we can't persuade the parties involved that you don't have the diamond. Meaning Dunn and Hamilton, I asked. Meaning everyone involved. It's possible that if Dunn and Hamilton didn't believe you were telling the truth, they may have conveyed that, knowingly or unknowingly, to the Manans. Perhaps we can correct that. For the first time, I was beginning to feel that there might be a light at the end of the tunnel, and a chance that we wouldn't all end up kebabbed. I was wrenched from this momentary respite when Mother said, Alex? What? She gave me her sternest motherly look. Tell him. Tell him what? She raised her eyebrows and cocked her head toward Nelson, signaling me to go ahead. Then it hit me. Oh! I turned to Nelson rather sheepishly and said, It might not be exactly that easy to get the Montanans to believe that we don't have the diamond. Why? Nelson said after a beat. Well, when they attacked me, I told them I didn't have it. But then I sort of told them that I did have it. There was another slight pause before Nelson said, Why did you do that? It was the only way I could think of to get away from them. Nelson sighed. Well, we'll see if we can correct that. Through proper channels, said Peter with a little snort. Mm-hmm. There's a bit of a hurry-up involved here, said Mother. Since we're going to be next in our graves if these people aren't convinced in time. So while you're going through proper channels, I think we need to take matters into our own hands. What do you mean? Nelson said. I think we should go straight to the source. What? There must be someone in charge of the Montanan temple. And there are people here. I think we should go to him straight away and see if we can't reason with him. They can't all be crazy. I wouldn't count on that, I said. Nelson folded his hand on his desk. I don't think that's advisable. Of course you don't. It isn't you with your neck on the chopping block. Now, can you tell us where their temple is? When Nelson didn't respond right away, Mother added, I have to believe you know where they are. Nelson continued to look at Mother. I assumed he was debating with himself whether or not to give us the information. Really, Larry, Mother continued, if you don't tell us, we'll just have to start asking around until we find someone who will. And if we do that, the Montanans are liable to find out what we're doing and find us before we find them. If that happens, we've had it. Nelson knew her well enough to know that she wasn't making an idle threat. He was completely still for a moment, then he reached down between the desks, pulled out a drawer, and retrieved a single sheet of paper. He closed the drawer, straightened up, and handed the sheet to Mother. Of course, we keep files on all types of groups that are operating in the United States, but are based outside American soil. We do have a file on the Montanans, and I pulled it the moment I first heard they were involved. Until now, they haven't caused anyone any trouble. Of course, nobody has caused any trouble for them either. So we had no idea how they would respond in adverse circumstances. That is the dress of the Montanan temple. Mother stood and took the paper from him. Thank you, she said curtly. Come along, boys. She headed for the door, and Peter and I got up and trailed along after her, just like Jane and Michael Banks. Jean, Nelson said right as she put her hand on the doorknob. The three of us stopped and turned around. These people are very, very dangerous, as you well know by now. I hope that once you've given it some thought, you'll reconsider this crazy ideal of yours and let the professionals handle it. The professionals, Mother said down her nose, have made a proper muck of it already, thank you. Not one to waste a dramatic exit, she flipped the door open and marched out. It would have been quite effective, except the door banged into my toe and I let out a very unlovely cry of pain before limping over the threshold, supported by my husband. I don't usually tussle with my mother, mainly because both of us believe in leading as harmonious an existence as possible, and because she's usually right. But this wasn't a usual situation. You're not going with us, I said loudly for the third time. You're bloody well not going there alone. I won't be alone. I could feel Peter rolling his eyes in the back seat. I'm going with you, Mother repeated, slapping her hand on the steering wheel as she maneuvered the car back onto the George Washington Memorial Parkway. It's far too dangerous for the two of you to be on your own. Mother, it's Wednesday night. I hope the head of the temple will be there so we can talk to him, but there probably won't be anyone there at all. Who would be in a temple on Wednesday night? Honestly, she shrugged, I obviously failed in your religious upbringing as well. So, what possible danger could there be? I concluded with only a slight pause between the halves of my sentence. There it is, she reported. If there won't be any danger, then there's no reason I shouldn't come with you. The hell there isn't, I said hotly. I said there probably won't be any danger, but there might be. I realized, though, not soon enough, that I was trying unsuccessfully to debate both sides of my own lame argument. I hoped she wouldn't notice that I just said it would and wouldn't be dangerous at the same time, but trying to get anything by her is like trying to build a house on a mudslide. All the more reason I should be there. If it's dangerous, you could use my help. It wouldn't be the first time I pulled your chestnuts out of the fire, now would it? She said it nicely, but it was accompanied by a small smile, sly enough to make me feel like a baboon. Yes, I said weakly, but that doesn't mean I would purposely lead you into danger. It doesn't, Mother and Peter said in unison. I shot a harsh look over my shoulder to let my husband know that I expected him to back me up even when I wasn't making any sense. I don't care, I exclaimed. It doesn't matter what argument you try to come up with. You are not going with us, and that's that. And that, of course, is always the wrong tack to take with my mother. There was a momentary stony silence and enough tension in the air to make my eardrums vibrate. After a pregnant pause, Mother smiled and said, Fine. Look, I didn't mean... No, she said broadly. That's quite all right. Really, it's fine. You're only looking out for my safety, and I appreciate that. I stared at the side of her face, searching it for any sign of sarcasm. I didn't find any. On second thought, I think it would be safer to have you with us. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.